Kethvar straightened his ceremonial robes and checked his chronometer for the third time in as many minutes. 27 years of diplomatic service, 43 species brought to heel, and not once had he encountered a race stubborn enough to drag negotiations past the second cycle. The humans, however, seemed determined to set new records for foolishness. The conference chamber aboard the flagship Dominion's Edge gleamed with polished metals and soft blue lighting, designed specifically to intimidate lesser species into submission. Every surface reflected Zephyrian superiority, the towering 12-foot ceilings, the imposing crescent-shaped table that forced visitors to crane their necks upward, and the massive viewport displaying their armada of 300 warships. Most species took one look and immediately began drafting surrender documents. "He approaches, Ambassador," announced his aide, Velktar, with barely concealed amusement, the human translator. Kethvar's mandibles clicked with anticipation. After months of these creatures' ridiculous posturing, claiming they needed time to consider their options and consult their governments, the end had finally arrived. Their so-called Earth Defense Force had managed to destroy exactly 12 Zephyrian scouts before retreating to their pathetic home system. Impressive for primitives, he supposed, but ultimately pointless. The chamber doors hissed open, and in walked disappointment. Marcus Vale stood perhaps 6 feet tall, unremarkable in every conceivable way. No cybernetic enhancements, no powered armor, no ceremonial weapons or intimidating tattoos. Just a standard-issue human male in a simple blue suit, carrying nothing more threatening than a data tablet and what appeared to be a steaming cup of some primitive beverage. His brown hair was slightly mussed, his eyes held no fear or anger, and he moved with the casual confidence of someone attending a routine business meeting. Kethvar suppressed a snort of derision. This was what humanity sent to negotiate their surrender? Not their greatest warrior, not their most brilliant strategist, not even someone who looked remotely impressive. Just this, a translator, a living, breathing admission that they had given up before even trying. "Ambassador Kethvar, I presume?" Marcus spoke in accented but serviceable Zephyrian, his voice carrying none of the trembling fear or desperate bravado that usually accompanied these final meetings. Marcus Vale, linguistic specialist. "I understand you have some documents you'd like me to help translate for my people." The sheer banality of it was almost insulting. Here stood a representative of a species facing complete annihilation, and he sounded like he was discussing lunch plans. Either humans possessed the most impressive death wish in galactic history, or they were even more primitive than intelligence reports suggested. Kethvar allowed himself a thin smile. This would be over within the hour, and he could finally return to civilized space. After all, what could possibly go wrong with a simple translation meeting? Admiral Korthnell swept into the chamber with all the theatrical flair his species was famous for. His forearms spread wide in a gesture that had intimidated countless alien delegations. His crimson battle armor gleamed under the chamber lights, each piece inscribed with the names of conquered worlds. The assembled representatives from 6 different species, all current vassals of the Zephyrian Empire, straightened in their seats, a reflex born from years of subjugation. Marcus Vale took a sip of his coffee. "Ah, the human arrives at last." Korthnell's voice boomed through the chamber's acoustic system, designed to amplify Zephyrian speech to truly impressive levels. "I trust you understand the gravity of this moment, creature. Today, your species joins the ranks of the civilized galaxy under Zephyrian guidance." Marcus nodded politely, set down his cup, and activated his tablet. "I'm ready to begin translation whenever you are, Admiral. Should I assume you'd like this recorded for both parties?" Kethvar blinked. The human's tone remained conversational, as if discussing weather patterns rather than the surrender of his entire species. Where was the trembling? The desperate last-minute bargaining? The theatrical speeches about freedom and resistance that primitives usually attempted? "Very well," Korthnell continued, clearly thrown by the lack of drama. "The terms are simple. Complete disarmament of all human military forces. Immediate cessation of all space-based activities. transfer of all technological assets to Zephyrian oversight, and, naturally, the standard tribute of 10% of your gross planetary product annually. Marcus listened intently, occasionally making notes on his tablet. The other alien representatives watched with barely concealed satisfaction. They remembered their own humiliating surrenders and took comfort in witnessing another species join their ranks. Additionally, the Admiral's voice grew more confident as he warmed to his subject. All human scientific research will be conducted under Zephyrian supervision. Your educational systems will incorporate proper respect for your new place in the galactic hierarchy. And your leaders will report directly to appointed governors. The human translator nodded along, his expression remaining pleasantly neutral. No gasps of outrage, no desperate protests, no demands for impossible alternatives. Just professional interest. Oh, and naturally, Corthnell added with what passed for a smile among his kind, any resistance to these terms will result in the sterilization of your primary population centers. Standard procedure, you understand. Marcus looked up from his tablet, blinked once, and said, "Would you like me to translate that exactly as stated, or would you prefer I clean up some of the rougher language for my people? We humans can be quite sensitive about certain phrasings." The chamber fell silent. Even the background hum of the ship's systems seemed to pause. In all his years of conducting surrender negotiations, Kethvar had never heard a response quite like that one. Corthnell's mandibles twitched. Translated exactly human. Your people need to understand their new reality. Absolutely, Marcus replied, taking another sip of coffee. Just wanted to be sure. Marcus cleared his throat and activated what appeared to be a recording function on his tablet. He spoke in the strange, flowing syllables of human language, his voice carrying the same professional tone he had maintained throughout the meeting. To Kethvar's ears, it sounded like musical gibberish, but the human seemed to be taking considerable time with each phrase. "I have conveyed your generous offer of partnership," Marcus announced when he finished. The Admiral's eloquent description of the mutual benefits this arrangement would provide to both our species, and his touching concern for human welfare during this transition period. Corthnell's expression shifted slightly. "Partnership? I said nothing about partnership, translator." "Oh, forgive me," Marcus replied without missing a beat. "Human language has some fascinating quirks when it comes to hierarchical relationships. What you might call subjugation, we might interpret as guided cooperation. Cultural differences, you understand." Kethvar felt the first stirring of unease. That did not sound like an accurate translation, but who among them could verify it? The Zephyrian Empire had made first contact with humanity only 6 months ago. Marcus was literally the only individual present who spoke both languages fluently. The Admiral pressed on, his voice growing harder. "Tell them that resistance is futile. That we have crushed dozens of species who thought themselves mighty. That their pathetic ships are no match for Zephyrian technology." Marcus nodded sagely and launched into another lengthy human speech. This one seemed to contain more animated gestures, and what might have been, was he smiling? When he finished, he turned back to the Admiral. "I've shared your deep admiration for human ingenuity and your surprise at how effectively our ships performed against your scouts. Also your philosophical observation that true strength comes not from superior technology, but from the courage to face overwhelming odds." "I said no such thing." Corthnell's voice rose to a near roar. "Cultural interpretation again, Admiral. When you mentioned crushing other species, I felt it was more diplomatic to focus on your obvious respect for worthy opponents. Humans are quite fond of martial poetry, so I may have embellished the phrasing to better capture your intent." Kethvar leaned forward in his seat. Something was definitely wrong here, but proving it would require calling the human a liar, which would derail negotiations entirely. The other species representatives were looking increasingly confused, clearly uncertain whether they were witnessing standard diplomatic protocol or something else entirely. "Perhaps," Marcus continued helpfully, "you could clarify exactly which aspects of your proposal you'd like me to emphasize. I want to ensure your message resonates properly with human sensibilities." The Admiral's four arms gestured in frustration. The surrender terms. The tribute. The complete submission to Zephyrian authority. Ah yes, Marcus made more notes on his tablet. I believe I translated those as suggested frameworks for cooperation, voluntary contribution to mutual defense, and respectful acknowledgement of Zephyrian experience in interstellar relations. Was that not accurate? The vein in Korthnell's forehead began to throb visibly. Human, are you deliberately mistranslating my words? Marcus looked genuinely hurt. Admiral, I'm simply doing my best to bridge the gap between our cultures. Sometimes that requires a bit of creative interpretation to prevent misunderstandings that could damage relations between our peoples. The human took another calm sip of his coffee, while the Admiral sputtered in barely contained rage. Enough. Korthnell slammed two of his four fists on the conference table, causing several of the vassal species representatives to jump in their seats. I demand verification of these translations. This human is clearly manipulating our words. Marcus set down his cup with exaggerated care. I understand your concern, Admiral. Translation is indeed a delicate art. Perhaps I could demonstrate some of humanity's more primitive communication methods to help bridge our cultural gap? Before anyone could object, Marcus stood and began what could only be described as the most bizarre diplomatic presentation in galactic history. He pointed at Korthnell, then at the Krillian representative, an insectoid creature named Thex Maul, and spoke rapidly in human language while making elaborate hand gestures. I've just explained to my people that Admiral Korthnell believes the Krillians have been secretly undermining Zephyrian authority by providing substandard tribute calculations, Marcus announced cheerfully. Thex Maul's compound eyes swiveled toward the Admiral. What? Our tribute calculations have been precise to the decimal point for 3 cycles. I said nothing about the Krillians. Korthnell protested. Oh, my apologies, Marcus continued, apparently oblivious to the mounting tension. Let me clarify. He spoke again in human, this time gesturing toward the hulking Brenthan delegate, Voxnar. Actually, the Admiral was praising Krillian efficiency while expressing concern that the Brenthans might be, quote, intellectually insufficient to handle complex mathematical concepts, unquote. Voxnar's massive frame tensed visibly. Did he now? Human, stop this nonsense immediately. Kethvar finally found his voice, but Marcus was already continuing his demonstration of primitive human communication. Now the Admiral is suggesting that perhaps we rotate tribute responsibilities among the vassal species, since some, Marcus gestured vaguely toward the bat-like Scythe representative, have been, and I'm translating loosely here, taking advantage of others' generosity. The Scythec delegate, Ninth Era, hissed audibly. We have paid every credit demanded. Fascinating, Marcus mused, consulting his tablet as if checking notes. According to my records, there seems to be some confusion about who owes what to whom. Admiral, didn't you mention that the tribute system might need restructuring, because certain species have been what was your colorful phrase, yes, living off the labor of their betters? The chamber erupted in overlapping protests as each species began defending their tribute record while simultaneously questioning others. Kethvar watched in growing horror as decades of carefully maintained diplomatic balance collapsed in real time. I never said any of that. Korthnell roared, but his voice was lost in the chaos of accusation and counter-accusation. Marcus nodded thoughtfully and made more notes. The Admiral also mentioned some interesting observations about military readiness among the vassal fleets. Apparently, the Brenthans have been stockpiling weapons beyond their allocated limits? That's classified information. Voxnar thundered. How would a human know our fleet specifications? More importantly, Thex Maul interjected, mandibles clicking angrily. Why are the Brenthans stockpiling weapons at all? Everyone stockpiles weapons. Ninth Era shrieked. The Scythec have been expanding our defense grid for months. Security preparations. Korthnell attempted to restore order. Standard defensive measures approved by. Oh, so everyone's been secretly arming themselves, Marcus observed mildly, taking another sip of coffee. How wonderfully human of you all. We do love a good arms race. Kethvar realized with dawning terror that their carefully orchestrated show of unity had devolved into open suspicion and barely restrained hostility. The vassal species were glaring at each other with obvious distrust, while Korthnell looked like he was considering having everyone in the room executed just to end the confusion. And through it all, Marcus Vale sat calmly at the table, occasionally jotting notes while sipping his primitive beverage, looking for all the world like an academic observer documenting some fascinating cultural phenomenon. The first blow came when Voxnar's massive Brenthan fist connected with Thexmol's thorax, sending the Krillian representative crashing into the conference table with a sickening crunch. Marcus calmly moved his coffee cup out of the way as purple blood splattered across the polished surface. "Fascinating," he murmured, typing rapidly on his tablet. Interspecies aggression patterns appear to follow predictable hierarchical disruption models. Ninth Era launched herself from her perch with a bone-chilling shriek, her razor-sharp talons aimed directly at Voxnar's exposed neck. The Brenthan caught her mid-flight, but not before her claws opened 3 parallel gashes across his shoulder armor. More blood, this time a disturbing shade of orange, began pooling on the chamber floor. "Stop this madness," Korthnell bellowed, drawing his ceremonial plasma sword. "You are all under Zephyrian protection." "Protection?" Thexmol hissed, ichor streaming from his compound eyes, while the Brenthans plot against us with illegal weapons stockpiles. "Illegal?" Voxnar roared, hurling Ninth Era across the chamber, where she collided with one of the viewing ports with a wet thud. The Scythic have been building hidden defense grids for months. Kethvar pressed himself against the wall as the violence escalated beyond anything he had witnessed in his diplomatic career. The other minor species representatives were either cowering behind overturned furniture or joining the melee with enthusiasm that suggested years of suppressed resentment. Marcus continued taking notes, occasionally glancing up to observe the carnage with the detached interest of a scientist studying lab specimens. "Admiral," he called over the sounds of combat, "should I be translating these developments for my people? They might find this cultural exchange quite educational." "Cultural exchange?" Kethvar gasped as Thexmol's severed arm landed near his feet. "You orchestrated this entire nightmare." "Did I?" Marcus looked genuinely puzzled. "I merely translated what I heard. It's hardly my fault if your people have such passionate reactions to honest communication." The human's calm was more terrifying than any weapon in the room. As bodies crashed around him and blood painted the walls in alien rainbow patterns, he sat serenely documenting everything like this was exactly what he had expected to happen. Korthnell's plasma sword carved through the air, narrowly missing Voxnar's head but severing 2 of his secondary arms at the shoulder. The Brenthan's agonized roar echoed through the chamber as he staggered backward, orange blood fountaining from the stumps. You see? Marcus continued conversationally to Kethvar while a scythe corpse slid down the wall behind him. "Humans have spent thousands of years studying group dynamics, tribal warfare, religious conflicts, political manipulation. We've gotten quite good at identifying pressure points in social structures." Ninth Era, apparently not as injured as she had appeared, dropped from the ceiling onto Thexmol's back, her talons piercing his carapace with wet, tearing sounds. The Krillian's death screech was mercifully brief. "Pressure points?" Kethvar whispered, unable to look away from the slaughter. "Oh yes," Marcus made another note as Korthnell's blade found Voxnar's chest, the plasma burning through armor and flesh with equal ease. "Every alliance has them. Buried resentments, economic tensions, cultural prejudices. You just need to know which buttons to push." The Admiral stood panting over Voxnar's smoking corpse, his ceremonial armor splattered with the blood of 3 different species. Only Ninth Era remained alive among the vassal representatives, and she was methodically shredding Thexmol's remains with disturbing enthusiasm. "How?" Kethvar's voice cracked. "How did you know exactly what would destroy us?" Marcus finally looked up from his tablet, and for the first time his expression showed something other than professional interest. It was pity. Ambassador, we've been monitoring your communications for months. Did you really think a species capable of interstellar warfare couldn't figure out basic espionage? The chamber fell silent, except for Nithara's wet-feeding sounds and the distant hum of the ship's systems. In the space of 10 minutes, centuries of carefully constructed diplomatic relationships had collapsed into corpses and gore. And Marcus Vale, translator and psychological warfare specialist, calmly finished his coffee while documenting humanity's first successful diplomatic mission. The tactical display on the chamber's main screen flickered once, then exploded into a constellation of red warning signals. Proximity alarms began wailing throughout the ship as 300 human vessels materialized from stealth positions surrounding the Zephyrian fleet. Impossible, Korth-Nel breathed, his bloodied sword falling from nerveless fingers. Our sensors showed empty space. Marcus glanced at the display with mild interest. Oh, that would be the cavalry. Right on schedule, too. He checked his chronometer with the satisfied air of someone whose transportation had arrived precisely on time. The ship's communication system crackled to life. Zephyrian flagship. This is Admiral Chen aboard the Earth vessel Determination. You are completely surrounded and outgunned. Prepare to receive boarding parties. Admiral Chen? Kethvar's voice came out as a strangled whisper. But the intelligence report said humans had no fleet command structure, and no unified military. Oh, we don't, Marcus agreed cheerfully, making final notes on his tablet. Humans are absolutely terrible at unified command structures. We prefer a more collaborative approach to warfare. The chamber shuddered as docking clamps engaged with the Zephyrian flagship. Through the viewports, Kethvar could see sleek human vessels moving with coordinated precision that belied every intelligence assessment the Empire had compiled. You see, Ambassador, Marcus continued, seemingly oblivious to Korth-Nel's growing panic, this was never a surrender negotiation. This was a reconnaissance mission, and might I say, quite a successful one. Reconnaissance? Kethvar felt his worldview cracking like thin ice under pressure. Oh yes. We needed to understand your power structures, your alliance dynamics, your psychological profiles. Marcus gestured at the carnage around them. Turns out your entire empire is held together by fear and mutual suspicion. Remarkably fragile, really. The chamber doors hissed open, and a squad of human soldiers in advanced combat armor filed in with practiced efficiency. They took in the blood-soaked scene without apparent surprise, their weapons trained on the surviving aliens with professional competence. Situation report, Specialist Vale? The squad leader's voice was crisp and businesslike. Mission accomplished, Sergeant Torres. Complete psychological profile assessment of target species completed. Enemy command structure compromised. Vassal alliance dissolved through internal conflict. Marcus stood and straightened his tie. Oh, and I've identified several potential diplomatic opportunities. Ninth Era, who had been crouched over Thexmol's remains, suddenly threw herself at the nearest human soldier with a desperate shriek. The soldier sidestepped with casual ease and delivered a precise nerve strike that sent the scythe collapsing to the floor, unconscious but alive. Impressive reflexes, Marcus observed. I'll make note of that for the xenobiology reports. Korth-Nel raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of surrender. We yield. The Zephyrian Empire formally surrenders to human authority. Oh, that's not necessary, Marcus replied with genuine surprise. We're not interested in conquering anyone. Far too much paperwork involved. Kethvar stared at the human in complete bewilderment. Then what do you want? Peace, naturally. But as equals, not subjects. Marcus picked up his empty coffee cup and examined it with mild disappointment. You see, humans have this peculiar notion that species are more productive when they're not living in constant fear of annihilation. The lead sergeant approached Korth-Nel with zip-tie restraints. Admiral, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit genocide, violation of interstellar law, and crimes against multiple sentient species. You have the right to legal representation under the Terran Convention. The what? Korth-Nel allowed himself to be restrained with the numb compliance of complete shock. Established 6 months ago, Marcus explained helpfully. Right around the time you declared war on humanity. Funny how that worked out. As the human soldiers efficiently secured the scene and began treating the wounded aliens with surprising gentleness, Kethvar realized that everything he thought he knew about humans had been catastrophically wrong. They weren't primitive. They weren't disorganized. They were apex predators disguised as harmless prey. Marcus Vale stepped carefully around the pools of alien blood as he made his way toward the chamber exit, his simple blue suit now decorated with splashes of purple, orange, and green from the carnage around him. Not a single drop belonged to him. He paused at the doorway, turned back to survey the wreckage of Zephyrian diplomacy, and nodded with professional satisfaction. Gentlemen, it's been educational, he announced to the room in general, then walked out into the corridor. A crowd of human personnel had gathered. The applause was immediate and thunderous. Dozens of humans, from ship crew to marine officers to what appeared to be civilian scientists, erupted in cheers and whistles. Someone started chanting Vale. 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 And within seconds the entire corridor had taken up the rhythm. Kethvar, escorted by 2 courteous but firm human guards, watched in stunned silence as Marcus accepted handshakes and back slaps like a conquering hero returning from battle. The contrast was surreal. This mild-mannered translator who had just orchestrated the most devastating diplomatic catastrophe in galactic history was being celebrated like he had won a sporting event. Outstanding work, Marcus. Admiral Chen appeared through the crowd, a woman perhaps 60 years old with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes. How long before they start fighting among themselves again? Oh, I'd estimate 6 hours before the surviving vassal species begin demanding protection from each other, Marcus replied, checking his chronometer. 12 hours before they start offering intelligence on Zephyrian military assets in exchange for human mediation. And the Admiral? Korthnil will be cooperative once he realizes we're not planning to execute him. Zephyrians respond well to mercy they don't expect. Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. Though I recommend keeping him separated from any Brenthan prisoners. Things got a bit personal in there. Kethvar found his voice at last. You planned all of this. Every word, every reaction, every moment of violence. Marcus turned to him with genuine surprise. Ambassador, I'm hurt. I didn't plan the violence at all. I simply provided accurate translations of deeply held resentments that your people had been suppressing for decades. Those were not accurate translations. Weren't they? Marcus tilted his head with academic curiosity. When Admiral Korthnil spoke of crushing resistance, was he not revealing his contempt for those he considers beneath him? When he mentioned your tribute system, was he not highlighting the economic exploitation that holds your empire together? Admiral Chen stepped forward, her expression shifting to something more formal. Ambassador Kethvar, I'm authorized to offer you a proposition. The Terran Republic is prepared to recognize Zephyrian sovereignty over your core systems in exchange for the immediate release of all vassal species and adherence to interstellar law regarding sentient rights. You're offering us terms? Kethvar struggled to process this development. After what just happened. Conquest is expensive and morally questionable, Chen replied with a shrug. We'd much rather have trading partners than subjects. Humans are peculiar that way. The crowd began to disperse as personnel returned to their duties, but the celebration continued with smaller groups discussing the day's events with obvious excitement. Kethvar noticed several humans taking detailed notes on alien physiology and psychology, already planning for future encounters. This is how you always operate, he asked Marcus, who was wiping alien blood from his tablet screen with a pristine handkerchief. More or less, humans excel at pattern recognition and social manipulation. It served us well throughout our history. Marcus looked up with that same mild expression he had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. Though I must say, your species provided an unusually rich psychological landscape to work with. As they were escorted toward what the humans politely termed guest quarters, Kethvar reflected on the complete reversal of everything he had believed about the balance of power in the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire, once the dominant force among the stars, had been reduced to a regional power in the span of a single conversation. "Ambassador," Marcus called out just before they reached the detention area. "If you need anything translated during your stay, please don't hesitate to ask. I find cross-cultural communication absolutely fascinating." Kethvar shuddered and decided that, for the sake of galactic peace, he would learn to speak human himself. Some risks were simply too great to take twice.